We were fortunate enough to have with us a group of leading Melbourne practitioners who bring deep expertise across the full spectrum of the property sector, from acquisition and development to planning approvals and through to construction and dispute resolution. Over the next half an hour or so, we'll be exploring some of the pressing issues shaping the industry right now, from regulatory changes and planning reforms to risk management in construction contracts and sustainable development trends. We'll start with a few broad questions to set the scene, then move into a discussion and audience Q&A if time permits. So let me welcome to the stage our panel guests today. Rhett Oliver, Head of Property at CPB in Australia, David Passarella, Planning Partner, Michael Lanyon, Property Partner, and Kerry Ianu, Construction Partner. Sorry, Kerry. Now, Rhett, tell me a little bit about your practice area and a project that you've worked on in the last 12 months.
Thanks, Chris. So my practice area is a bit different to the others. I'm actually a Queenslander. So I moved down from Brisbane in about 2019, so just before COVID hit. So I practice effectively in 2 states. Got a large practice in Queensland, a large practice in Victoria, and also actually do quite a few resi master plan projects in Tasmania as well. The mix of work is quite broad. So a lot of built form mixed use projects, urban renewal projects, a lot of industrial and commercial subdivisions and built form projects, and quite a lot of residential master plan projects, and pretty much spanning across all asset classes as well. But there's a number of different speeds going on in the different states at the moment in terms of, I guess, the economies, and also that's sort of driving what is buildable and what projects are feasible. So, for example, there's not a hell of a lot of built form projects that are sort of getting out of the ground in Victoria at the moment. So the focus down here for us has been a lot of residential master plan land projects, a lot of sort of infill, medium density residential projects, townhouse project work as well. There are some big projects that we have permits for. Our clients have got permits for, but they, just given current regulatory constraints at the moment, we're consistently waiting on authority consents, service authority approvals, and actually trying to get projects to stack. So that's the practice. Some recent projects, so in Victoria, one of our larger land projects, we're doing a 900 lot master plan project for Landwise at Thornhill Park. We've just finished for Pelicano Group and Perry Projects, their 17 Bennett's Lane building. So that's a 21 level, 12,000 square metre commercial office building with some retail downstairs. In Queensland, there's a $1 billion mixed use project for Sekasui House called West Village over in West End, which is probably 10 residential towers and about 25,000 square metres of retail GFA. So we've just launched the last tower of that project and we're about to settle the second last tower. So that's been like a 10 or 12 year project. So that's I guess an example of some of the projects. David and I have just received instructions on a 55 story build to rent tower down at Docklands, where we're doing the planning and sort of development agreement negotiations for that. But yeah, and just the scale is not what we necessarily focus on. Like as I say to everybody, like, yeah, we'll do those bigger projects, but we'll still do the 2-lot subdivisions out the back of, you know, Landsfield or whatever it is as well. So that's it.
Thanks, Rhett. Now, David, so tell me about your practice and something that you've been working on in the last 12 months.
Thanks, Chris. So my name's David Passerella. I head up the planning team here at CBP. I've been at the firm for about coming up to 4 years. Before that, I headed up the planning team at a couple of other national law firms. I operate on a pro-development philosophy, so only act for developers, and we fight hard for developers and push for development. In terms of the market generally in planning, I think touching on what Rhett said, the market is a tough market here in Victoria, as everyone's well aware of. We're keeping busy on a lot of developers have had historic permits and that have been approved either from VCAT earlier. A lot of the bigger projects this year have been amendments to those projects back to the tribunal, more so to recut them, make them more efficient and keep costs so hopefully they can get them off the ground. Some of them have been quite large. We've done some hotel project. We did a hotel project in Albert Road. We've done a large-scale mixed-use development for Pelicano. You know, we're working on some large build-to-rent projects. The build-to-rent is still going, but it's probably not as big as it was a couple of years ago. That was a turning thing where developers went to when the sales dried up to try to get their projects up. I think the market's now becoming a bit saturated with these build-to-rent products, and generally in planning, there's a lot of government push for rezoning. So what we've seen this year is a lot of some PSPs in those growth areas, which we've worked on. We've also worked on the Suburban Rail Loop Authority has rezoned some of that land around the train stations of that new line. That's been quite extensive, the amount of work in that project through Box Hill and the other precincts. We've acted for some large landholders and involved intensely in that project. So, you know,
You're also working on the windfall gains tax that comes out of it.
Yeah. I've become a tax specialist as well, because one of the things coming out of all these rezones is obviously the windfall gains tax, and there's some ways and mechanisms we've started to employ to reduce that gain when it comes payable on the rezone. So that's in a nutshell what I do. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, David. And now, Michael, so tell me about your practice and maybe something in the last 12 months too.
So Michael Lanyon, I've sort of got two practices really. So I'm property, and in that sense a bit like Rhett, but I'm sort of schizophrenic. So my team does mums and dads purchases, so we do the very small, but we also act for the good guys, the developers. So this morning there was an issue about the coffee machine in one of the apartments. Yesterday I was looking at a 302 lot subdivision. So as I say, a bit schizophrenic. But on the property side, what's happening that's new at the moment, so land lease communities, what we used to call caravan parks. So they're a way of getting housing, especially into regional areas. I don't think I'd ever done any until a couple of years ago. Now there's quite a few of those coming through. Rooming houses, I don't think I'd ever worked on one of those until recently, but now Chris and I are both working a bit in the rooming house area. So that's sort of quite interesting. And for the developers, so Salter Properties, when you get to the larger stuff, the inland ports at Altona and Lyndhurst, and large developments, commercial, industrial, and a lot of work for Blue Earth Group, who do probably 1,000 apartments a year, and they mostly sell through the investor market. So whilst other people can't get sales away, they're still getting their sales away. So that's the first part of my practice, is property. The other part is sort of the Asian practice. So I'm on the board of the Chinese Museum. I have been to China more than 30 times. I was in Vietnam and Cambodia weekend before last. And for those clients, I do or supervise whatever it is that's coming in. So a lot of it is property development. Over in Vietnam, it was advising on the purchase of a steel fabrication business. Not quite part of my property business, but don't tell anybody else in the office. So the combination of both property and perhaps the Chinese market. Chinese clients include people like Shudao Group, who are bigger than BHP and bigger than Rio Tinto. They're the infrastructure arm of the Sichuan government. So that's sort of fascinating when you get to deal with organisations like that, and you work out just how slowly they work, but that's all right. What I've been doing, interestingly, let's not say in the last year, let's say yesterday. So yesterday I was out with Blue Earth Group, and we've been working on a site which is a Victoria Invest site that's been made available. And I think the developers say they usually have to look at about 100 projects before they get one that goes. And in our discussion yesterday, having done all the reviews, etc., we decided that the project was too hard, too complicated. Victoria Invest had put too many barriers up, so we weren't going to do it. So I always find it interesting being with the client when they're in that decision-making part of the process, especially when they say, no, we're not going to do it, even though they've invested time and effort.
Thanks, Michael. And now, Kerry, and so tell me about your practice and something interesting in the last 12 months too.
I'll try to be brief because I'm the last cab of the rank, not the first. My practice encompasses construction and engineering matters, and that ranges all the way from the very beginning stages, assisting in negotiating contracts where it's time to get brick and mortar and to get things going, all the way to the tail end when the disputes start to arise. And that's when I really have the fun that I have. But generally speaking, my service offering encompasses it all, so from beginning to the end. And the reason why we do that very well is we've got the battle scars. We've seen what clauses work. We've seen what clauses don't work. We see what judges like and what judges don't like. The truth is I've never lost a case, by the way. Judges just get it wrong, so... In fact, they're getting it wrong too often at the moment. But anyway, but having that type of appreciation of how things play out in a game of chess, effectively, where there is uncertainty, helps clients navigate with some certainty early on in the piece. I say to clients when they come see me very early on, I say good contracts make for good marriages, and very bad contracts make for nuclear divorces. So it's good to avoid the potential for disputes by negotiating contracts which are fair, understanding where you sit and where things are going to end up if there's a dispute, rather than having that uncertainty now. I act for everyone in the space. I've acted for developers. Developers are quite popular now for me because of my colleagues here who have a pro development practice, but I act for the very big consultants, big multinational consultants, local consultants, constructors, and everyone within that realm. We do a lot of stuff which I can't speak about because most of it's disputes work, and no one really wants to air their dirty laundry. But just to describe how turnkey we are, Rhett is involved in that Bennett's Lane project, and so am I to a degree, where we're getting contractors in to do various components of a very big project, whether it be a hotel or a fit out, and we assist the developer in getting all of that across it all. And from a turnkey perspective, it's good to have specialists in different subspaces within the development space. It's easier for me to walk over to Rhett's office and say, you know, I'm doing this construction contract for a contractor who's going to do the hotel in Bennett's Lane. Is there anything I should be concerned about, or anything you want to let me know may be a sticky issue? It helps because that information is kept in-house, so you don't have a generalist who's saying, oh, yeah, I can do some property work, or I can look at a lease. I don't even know what to do when I see a lease. I normally just pass it over. But that's it. A big job that I've done recently is Makita are setting up, although it's actually almost finished. I think it's the biggest warehouse in the Southern Hemisphere. And I helped Makita out of Japan to negotiate and finalize their construction contract with a big national contractor. The negotiations were short, which was probably a compliment to me because there wasn't much for the builder to negotiate with. And that job has gone very well. I think they're almost complete. They're 3 months ahead of schedule, which is unheard of in a construction context. Yeah, so that's about it from me. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Kerry. So now we'll just press on to the panel discussion section. So with the change in, with everything happening in property development, there's issues across the various areas. So I'll start with you, Rhett. So now with Queensland recently adopting vendor statements in property transactions, something that has been in place in Victoria since 1983. With your practice covering Queensland and Victoria and vast experience in both, what is something that you would like Victoria to adopt in developments that Queensland currently do?
How long have we got? So, look, I think at a high level, I would adopt a whole heap of things, but the things that I would be looking to change down here are things that will attract investment back into Victoria in property and property development. Some of the examples which David will probably talk about, and there are amendments to the Planning and Environment Act that are seeking to achieve this, but more certainty around development assessment, timeframes for planning permit development applications, and I guess code compliance, sort of tick and flick type development assessment for particular projects and particular uses. That uncertainty down here at the moment and objector review rights is just killing project feasibilities all over the place. The ability for a $1 billion urban renewal project in West Melbourne to sit there and not be able to be implemented because we're waiting on some consent from Melbourne Water just makes my head explode, and I don't know how financiers of these projects, can actually sort of tick off on these things in investment committees. So development assessment, certainty and timeframes. Some of the other things would be, and we've discussed with, councillors and mayors down here that participate in our other sort of functions and initiatives, but greater incentives around infrastructure contributions like offsets, credits, discounts, deferred contributions to attract certain uses and certain development. It's something that a number of local governments in Queensland do really well. Like, as an example, there's a build to rent infrastructure contributions incentive in Brisbane City Council at the moment where they effectively defer your entire infrastructure contribution for, which would usually be payable before the commencement of the use. They defer it by 5 years, and then the timing is the timing for payment of that is to be applied consistently with the operation of the build-to-rent business for a build-to-rent use. So they're still ultimately getting their contributions, but they're actually thinking about the end-use operator, the nature of the business, and what they actually need to do as a local government to attract that investment. And I just think that it's completely missing here, and to the contrary, the developers are just slugged with additional levies, taxes, charges, costs, and again, there's that uncertainty means that people who are looking to invest here, if they've got a choice between that uncertainty and someone wanting to give them a discount in a thriving state and environment, they will choose that. The last thing is just there's some of the titling laws in Victoria are pretty archaic and sort of haven't kept up with the developments of titling law in New South Wales, Queensland and WA. It's really around mixed-use projects where in both Queensland and New South Wales, they've got a very clear way of dealing with volumetric subdivision, where you effectively can carve out chunks of a building or multiple buildings in parts, put them in one title that can actually sit outside of an OC, and then they've got a thing called an instrument that's registered on title called a building management statement that effectively deals with reciprocal access, service connection rights and cost sharing as between the different lot owners and title owners within that whole precinct. So it's something that you can throw over a massive master plan that might involve multiple towers, office uses, whatever else, integrated basements, but it's not sitting within an OC, so you're not subject to, the developers are not subject, and ultimate institutional property owners who are going to hang on to certain retail and other uses in that project are not subject to getting bashed by disgruntled OCs in no-cost jurisdictions like VCAT. And it actually ultimately creates a hell of a lot of improved end value to the owner of the retail and commercial assets in those projects, and is a hell of a lot cleaner than having, 300 OCs affecting a particular project, which no one really understands how the interplay between them all. So there's just a couple of things like that, which, I think would be really, really positive for not only industry, but the ultimate owners of those properties, and, unlock a lot of value, and also, again, attract more investment by those master developers to Victoria. There's a whole, I've got another about 10 dot points.
That's all good.
I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Rhett. David, Rhett did touch on this, but Victoria is going through its largest planning reform in decades with the planning amendment Better Decisions Made Faster bill being introduced recently. In terms of development, what are your thoughts on the bill, and does it go far enough to encourage development so that we can meet the Vic government's goal of building 2.24 million homes by 2051?
Thanks, Chris. Before I answer that, I just want to touch on some of the things that Rhett said, and it pains me to say that Queensland are actually doing things better than us in Victoria, and I've seen that through some of the property think tanks and panel discussions we've been having up north, and
The AFL Grand Final.
where it's refreshing to hear mayors come and talking about development feasibility and how they'll pull up projects and get projects going where they don't stack up. You don't hear that from our mayors in our local councils. And it's clear that when you look at Queensland, and particularly even the Gold Coast, I think the acting mayor who was presenting at an event we were at a couple of weeks ago up north, he was saying that there's 72 cranes in the air in the Gold Coast, and you look around Melbourne, you can count them on one hand. So it really shows the difference in what construction and what they're doing right, and where we're struggling. So it hurts me to say that Queensland is doing it better. Coming back to the bill, look, I'm always receptive of legislation that comes in that fast, helps with getting permits faster and quicker. I don't think, my personal view is I don't think that's going to be the answer. I think planning, yes, it's a bit clunky here in Victoria, but I don't think that is the reason why development's not getting off the ground. It's clear when I speak to my developer clients that it is a part of it, but it's not a huge part. I mean, when you look at the amount of permits that developers are holding on to without acting on, they're just shelving these permits because they can't get them up. So it's not a matter about getting these permits quicker. The permits are there. People can't build them. And the reason is because of the taxes that come associated with property. I just Googled on AI Victorian property taxes, and I've got to disclose there was an AI answer, but it was 29 taxes that are associated with property in Victoria. It's huge. So, I mean, we have more taxes than letters in the alphabet. So that needs to be, that's where my view in the government where we need reform. We need reform in construction costs. They're too high. You can't get these projects off the ground, and that's the real thing. And they're the hard questions for this government. And the easy answer is, well, let's blame planning and let's put in some new reforms and some new processes and that don't cost us anything, and let the general public think that we're doing something. But do I think that that's going to make a difference? No. And when you look at the Act, it now classifies applications into 3 types. It's Type 1, Type 2 and Type 3. And the detail around what they are is going to be issued in regulations. But anecdotally, Type 1 is your dwelling, where you can get a decision within 10 days. But that assumes you don't have any overlays over your land. And how often do you get a clean piece of land without any overlay? So again, unlikely many people are going to take that up. When you look at Type 2 applications, which are your townhouse developer and sort of smaller kind of developments, yes, it's positive that there will be an opportunity for neighbours to put in comments, but they're not objections and they don't have third-party review rights. So I think that's a positive. But generally, we have that anyway with deemed to comply provisions that came out not too long ago about if you met certain setbacks and all these requirements, then you're deemed to comply and you can't challenge that. So, and then the third one, which is your larger applications, well, that's got to be determined within 60 days, which is what the current system is, and it allows objection rights. So, is it going to really bring about great change? I don't think it will. I do think it will be positive, and I think it will bring some change, but we'd be kidding ourselves to think that this legislation is the answer. So that's my views on it.
And probably
Can I just add on the taxes? I was at a topping out ceremony the other day down in North Melbourne for Blue Earth Group. It's a couple of hundred apartment building that's topped out, and in the speeches, I think Michael Dibb said that for a $700,000 apartment, the taxes were $138,000, assuming it was an Australian buyer, not a foreign buyer. So that's a pretty high proportion.
Thank you. And so, well, over to you, Michael. So what are the main issues, problems that you see on a day-to-day basis popping up in property transactions?
So we work pretty closely with the litigation department because people are always getting into trouble. And there's probably 2 areas at the moment that I see. Firstly, with my Asian clients, and I've got somebody coming in soon for something a bit like this. They've gone into an investment and they come and see me and they say, I've spent $10 million and I've been robbed. And I get the paperwork and I do the figures and I can only get to 8.5 million. And I said, well, you said there was 10 million. And of course there's been $1.5 million paid in RMB back in China. Now, of course, what that means is that they haven't paid the correct stamp duty and they haven't put in the correct FRB application. So if you want to have the fight for money that's clearly, been wrongfully taken, you've got to first fix up all those issues and go to the relevant officials and say, terribly sorry, we didn't do it right, we'll pay you some more tax, and then we'll start having our fight. So that's something I see very commonly, which I always find very sad, because it makes what should be a pretty simple recovery very hard. The second thing, and this has been around since 1st of March 2020, but that was sort of the start of COVID, so perhaps people didn't quite pay it enough attention, but they changed the Sale of Land Act to say that a vendor now has to tell a purchaser everything that a purchaser might want to reasonably know before signing a contract. Sounds pretty simple, but of course people don't do it. One, because they forget, or two, because they want to hide things. And so with the litigation department, we've probably got half a dozen matters running at the moment, probably more, that are in court because there hasn't been the correct disclosure. So to give an example, client purchased a property in Queen Street and the agent said, I've got another buyer, he's offered this amount, but if you increase the deposit to 20% and sign today, you can have it. So the client signed. We're now in litigation, and as part of the discovery process, you find out, and I didn't realise this, but the big agents have things called bid books, where they keep a record of all the bids, and nobody else had made another offer. So the agent has misrepresented, and that's led our client to buy. So that's a little bonus that we weren't expecting. But the second thing we did know about was that there was a report that had been prepared that said there was $7 million needed to be spent on the lifts, the air conditioning, the infrastructure to bring it up to today's standards. And that report was given to some buyers, but not to us, or not to our client. So here we are, we've bought a city property and there has not been full disclosure. So that one's currently in the courts at the moment. And you've got to say, you think that should be all right? We should be able to get home on that one. I was driving home last night having a discussion with an agent who acts for various Chinese family offices in managing their funds, and they're looking at buying a suburban office building, a couple of thousand square metres of office, and he said to me, I'm getting somebody out to look at the air conditioners because the agent said to me, the air conditioners are all stuffed, but the owner doesn't want me to tell you. So you sort of think, well, that's interesting. So what we're probably going to do there, and you can imagine a clever agent, we're going to set it up, have a good discussion with a sort of price in mind. Then we're going to go along and get our own reports on the air conditionings, the lifts, the contamination, etc. And we're going to do two things. One, we're going to ask for the price to be lower, but two, we're going to give the vendor copies of all these reports. Once they've got them, Section 12D says the vendor now has to give those reports to anybody else who's looking at buying the property. So you've now decreased the value of the property for the vendor. So you can sort of use these things. So as I say, we're in court, but we're also using this as a bit of a weapon. Fascinating section, pretty straightforward. I have to compliment my wife, who was a Director of Consumer Affairs, for getting that through, and now we're enjoying the benefit of it.
Thanks, Michael. Now, Kerry, Victoria's developer bond regime was introduced to ensure developers meet their obligations when building residential dwellings of more than 3 stories. Now, from your perspective, what are your thoughts on the scheme, the key risk or compliance issues for developers?
It touches on what both David and Rhett said earlier. Not only is there taxes which have gone to the hilt, now developers have to put up, we don't even know how it's going to work, but as of the 1st of July 2026, which is 6 months away, developers have to put up what's called a bond levy of 3%, either 2 or it's 3% of the construction price. So whatever it costs to build, a developer's got to earmark funds for at least 2 years to account for defects. So not only do you have to pay the 26 items of tax, you also have to put up cash effectively, or the value of cash, for 2 years post the completion or post the issue of an occupancy permit. That's a huge holding cost that a developer didn't even factor into account, or didn't even exist 6 months ago. And that's another factor which militates against, starting to build. We don't even know how it's going to work. We don't know what type of financier or insurer what type of product's going to be sold to developers to give effect to these developer bonds. I would assume you're going to have very wealthy Lloyd's underwriters sitting in London that are looking very excited at this because they can build a product which can be sold and it gets banked. But you can imagine that procuring such a bond will be expensive. I don't even know if banks are interested in getting involved. We've got no idea. So that's the first fundamental problem. The second fundamental problem which arises out of this developer bond levy is when will it be effective and to what extent? The proposed legislation, not even proposed now, it's been enacted, is not clear on whether it's retroactive or forward-thinking. But the likely stronger argument is that it's forward-thinking. So it doesn't matter what you've agreed. If an occupancy permit is issued after the 1st of July, irrespective of whether you priced it a year ago or 2 years ago, or got a builder to price at X, you will be required as a developer to put up that bond post the 1st of July. It's significant and it's critical. I have a few surveyor clients, building surveyor clients, that phone me all the time asking the question, what do I tell the owner, the developer client? And it's very simple. Build and get an occupancy permit before the 1st of July, and if you don't, well, that's how it's going to work. That's the second critical thing. The third critical thing is, unfortunately, the VBA, as we all know, hasn't done a very good job of anything in particular. And what they've decided to do... look, I don't care. The VBA hates me. They've got a dartboard, so they'll never instruct me anyway. They don't like me, and that's fine.
It's not just the VBA.
Yeah. Even my own clients don't like me. Anyway, what they tried to do now is, as any bureaucratic arm does, is if something doesn't work, we'll centralise everything. So the VBA has converted itself into what's called the Building and Plumbing Commission, and they're centralising everything. So they're going to manage it all, and they're going to manage this too. Now, the VBA hasn't been able to manage its own affairs. The DBDRV hasn't been able to manage its own affairs. All of these sub-arms within the building regulatory space have been inept at everything they've done. I'm interested to see how a centralised model is going to change anything. It's going to make it much worse. But that's what they've decided to do in all of their wisdom. And they are going to be managing this entire process effectively. They've also created what's called, within this developer bond levy regime, the appointment of what's called a building assessor. So the building surveyor's job is finished when the occupancy permit is issued. And for the next 18 months, an independent building inspector, effectively, for a lack of better words, will go and look at properties. It's mainly towers that we speak about, because this only applies to buildings of 3 rises, over 3 rises. So you're really looking at the bigger stuff. And they prepare what's called 2 reports: a preliminary report shortly after the occupancy permit's issued, and then a final report. This all looks great for the consumer because, yes, defects are going to be rectified. Developers are going to not be, fly away into the sunset with their special purpose vehicles, which close down the moment the development's completed. But all it's going to do is create a proliferation of even more disputes about building defects. It's a huge impasse. It's a huge impediment to any developer who's already disinterested in Victoria. They're all going to Queensland because everything's pro-developer there. What developer in their right mind is now going to say, well, look, now I've got to find another 3%. I've got to earmark it. I may not get it back, because if there's a defect, those funds are used to rectify the defect. So there's a high probability in any building, in the building space, having acted for everyone, there's always going to be an issue, and there's always going to be rectification required. So you've got a developer who may never get the money back. Yes?
Do you think the defects liability period will be extended to match that?
Well, no. Well, you've already got a long stop you've got the 12-month defects, potentially. I'll tell you something interesting. again, I'm speaking too much, but it's just because it's new. I recently, a big builder came to me and said they're going to do a residential tower, and a developer produced a draft construction contract, and it was a heavily mutated AS contract. When I mean heavily, I've never seen it so heavily mutated. And what it had for the first time was a developer seeking to pass through the development bond levy obligation onto a builder. Obviously, I pushed back very hard, but what I'm doing is I'm banking those clauses to use them for when a principal comes to me. But you're starting to see that. So what they do is they take the 3%, and that they will tell a builder who's working on very low margin anyway, on your towers, you're looking at, if you're lucky to get 5 or 6% for a builder. And they're saying to builders, well, I know I've got to wear this obligation, and I know it's for me, but I want you to factor that into your pricing because it's going to be your problem too. So yes, it may end up happening that the DLP period is increased from 12 months to 24 months. That's another problem for a builder, because if they're working on a BG retention system, a security system where 2.5% of the 5% is released on PC, and you've got to wait another 12 months, that could increase your financing cost because you would have to have a BG for another year. Having BGs is expensive. Banks are not cheap. And the advice I would give to you builders, wherever you are, is consider getting insurance performance bonds. They're becoming more popular. They're a cheaper product. Insurers have got more cash than banks, which is weird. But they're delivering a cheaper product. Yes, but that's the answer to the question.
Well, guys, thank you for a really insightful discussion. We've covered a lot of ground, from the practical challenges in property and planning to the evolving risks in construction and the way these issues are playing out day to day here in Victoria. So thank you to our panellists for sharing the expertise and experiences, and to everyone here for your questions and engagement. So we hope you leave with